Welcome to Basics of Running a Small Business, Day-to-Day Operations. I am Shauna Huntington. I am the founder and CEO of Fortiviti. We're an outsourced accounting department in the back office, and also the creator of the Small Business Bootcamp, which launches later this year. So our business essentially exists to take care of all of the stuff that happens in a business that has nothing to do with the products and services that you're selling, right? All of the other things that you never knew you were getting in business to do that came along with it, right? Invoicing your customers, getting payroll processed, making sure that your sales tax gets filed, really just handling all those other things that come along with running a business that are in addition to the actual selling and of your service and servicing your customers and selling your product. And so what we've seen over the years, we've seen that struggling businesses or businesses that struggle or businesses that ultimately end up failing or just not seeing their full potential, it's typically not due to the product that they're selling or the service that they're providing. It ends up being because they get behind, they get buried beneath all the other stuff that happens in the business. They get in trouble potentially, and they get behind on taxes or payroll, or they don't file what they're supposed to file. It's really not because they've got a bad service or that their product is defective. And so, what we're going to talk about today is really talking about how to build that foundation in your business, how to put the systems, tools, processes in place so that you can continue to scale and grow your business beyond, just you, beyond just your small team, beyond your mid-sized team, your larger team. Like, really, how do you build that foundation so that you don't struggle as you're scaling your business, and so that your business becomes scalable, right? You can do a lot when you're small and nimble without processes and procedures and without having those systems in place. But in order to scale, you've got to put those in place so that you can see that scalability and do it less painfully. So today we're going to talk about organizational structure and management. So when I talk about this, I'm not talking about your legal structure, how you're taxed. I'm talking about how do you structure your business? What are the functional areas in the business that you need, and how do you manage that? We're then going to talk about processes and documentation. And people ask me, we've been in business for 15 years now, and people ask me all the time, what's the one thing you would change if you could go back over, start all over again? And, this coming from someone who is very process-oriented today and has every process documented you could imagine, when we started, we did not. And if I could go back and do it all over again, I would have spent more time on the front end getting processes in place so that when we took off, we grew very quickly, very fast. It was very painful because we didn't have the processes in place. So we're going to talk about what processes you should have in place and kind of what are the systems and tools you can use to develop those processes and document them. We're then going to talk about IT structure and file organization. And, I told Matt I might get booed out of the room for this from some of you, but if you are not paperless yet in 2023, that is the number one goal that I will tell you to go home and work on and set that goal for yourself in 2023. It used to be not being paperless was just, it's a choice, it's real, we're just old school, it's how we do it, we've always done it this way, it works. You're going to be getting passed over, and your business is going to struggle to keep up if you don't actually implement those processes and procedures, implement the systems, and go paperless. So we're going to talk a little bit how to do that, and you can boo me later. You can rate me on my score after this. But I really do think that is one of the most important things you can do to continue to scale your business and to keep up with the competition and just with business in general. We're going to talk about CRM, project management, task tracking. With all these things that I keep talking about, all the stuff that you have to do in business, you need to have somewhere to manage that, right? Somewhere that's going to remind you that task needs to be completed, something that's going to help you know when to do things, how to do things, where to do things, and keep that all in one place. So we'll talk a little bit about some things to look for in that area. Then we're going to talk about accounting and talk about the money in the business, right? We're all, as far as I know, none of you are nonprofits, so we're all in business to generate a profit. We're all in business to generate an income for ourselves and for our employees. And so we're going to talk about accounting structure in your business, really how to keep on track with everything that needs to be done in that area. And finally, payroll and HR. So we're going to talk about your people. You know, your business exists because you have team members to help you exist, right? You cannot service your customers without your team to service those customers. It's going to be really hard to scale a business if you're a team of one and continue to be that way. So we're going to talk about, you know, the compliance side of having a team and all of the extra things that come along with having a team. But then we're also going to talk about, you know, culture and how do you make sure that you've got team members that are thriving and performing and that really are wanting to be a part of your team or wanting to grow with your company. So let's get started on organizational structure and management. So when I talk about this, I'm talking about the functional areas of your business, right? What are the departments that you need? What are the divisions that you need? How do you need to break your business down so that things run smoothly, so that things run efficiently, right? And so if you think about, you know, let's just say, I don't know what tenure everyone is in here, but let's say you're just starting out in your business and it's you're the owner and you wear every hat and you've got like 3 crew members that go out to perform jobs with you, right? Just because you are wearing all of those hats does not mean that your business should have one division and one department and that's you and you lead that department and you're doing all of those things. Your business should be structured where it makes sense on how you're dividing up the responsibilities, how you're dividing up the tasks that need to be completed. And so you really want to think through, you know, yes, I may be wearing a lot of hats, but what makes sense? If I was a $10 million company instead of a $10,000 company, what would I need in place and what would that structure look like? And so when you think about your functional areas, you know, there's 3 standard functional areas that you'll hear from, you know, most companies, and then there'll be variations from there. And so you're going to have sales and marketing, business development, sales and marketing, you know, it's different terms are used, and that's really driving the revenue, bringing the business in, you know, bringing brand awareness, bringing company awareness, but it's all about bringing the money in the door, right? And then you're going to have your operations, your production, your operations. Who's actually delivering the service? How are you delivering the service? You know, scheduling, production, planning, staff planning, all of that is going to be under your operations umbrella, right? Then you've got administration. So administration is kind of all the other stuff that we've been talking about, right? So it's IT, it's HR, it's payroll, accounting, facilities management. You know, you might have an office manager that falls into that category. So it's really all the other stuff that has to be done in a business, that becomes part of your business, that is going to be falling into that administration category, okay? So once you determine what functional areas you need, right, then you can build out the rest of the structure. And so you may decide in your company that sales and marketing you're too big for sales and marketing to just be one division or department. You may have sales and marketing separate, right? You may decide that administration, you're going to split that out into more functional areas because it's just become too large for it to be one. But whatever works for your business is what works, right? There's no one size fits all, but it's important that you think about what does make sense for your business and how you want information to flow, what kind of positions that you need within each of those divisions, functions, departments, whatever you want to call them. You may also want to have a division. Let's say you have concrete and paving, right? You may say, I don't want to have one operational division, I'm going to have 2. I'm going to have one for each part of the business that we're providing. So however it works for your business, that's how you want to structure those functional areas. Then once you've done that, then that's really what builds out your leadership team. So if you've got an administration division, you've got your operations, you've got your sales and marketing, then you're going to have someone leading each of those divisions for you, and they're going to be overseeing that. They're going to be making sure that the things are getting done within those departments that need to be done, and you are then going to have someone appointed to lead that team. That becomes part of your leadership team, okay? And this all plays into then the accountability chart. So you're building all of these functional areas, you're building this structure to then determine, okay, who is accountable for all the things that need to be done in the business, right? Who is going to be responsible for making sure that we close the next deal? Who is going to be responsible for sending the invoices out? Who is going to be responsible for paying the bills? You know, who in my company is going to be responsible for all the things that need to get done, right? And the accountability chart is how you can build that out. So I'll show you a little bit of, we'll go through an actual example of an accountability chart. This kind of just shows you the high-level structure, what that looks like. But essentially, you're going to have, okay, I'm the leader of the company, right? And then I'm going to have my leadership team, which is going to be overseeing these different functional areas that I've determined make sense for my business, right? And then you're going to have the various positions within that department, right? So I might have a VP of Sales and Marketing, and then I've got a Director of Sales and a Director of Marketing that report to that person, right? I may have a VP of Operations, and then I've got Production Manager and Scheduling Manager, Foreman, Crew. I've got all of these positions that have to report to that kind of make up that structure, right? So the important thing to think about with your accountability chart is who is responsible for what? All the things that need to be done in your business, who is accountable to get those done, right? So each box on your accountability chart, which you'll see all these different boxes and positions that are here, each of those boxes represents a job or a role that needs to be filled in your business, right? And within that role is listed all the things that they are accountable to, okay? The important thing to remember is that, you know, your goal with building out an accountability chart is that you're building it out for what your company should look like, right? What you're going to look like down the road. If I'm, you know, when we first started using accountability charts like 12 years ago, I was in a lot of the boxes in my business. And we had a team of 5 people, and everybody else was in a lot of boxes, right? So you'd have one person that was filling 2 or 3 boxes because we were not big enough to hire a marketing assistant and a marketing manager and an office manager and all of these positions. But if I really sat down and thought about it, I'm not typically going to have my office manager also doing my marketing and also sending out my invoices, right? That wouldn't be the ideal situation. Typically, by the way, marketing people and accounting people, not the same people, right? So, but it just may be that I have to do that right now. So my accountability chart should say, these are the positions that I need to fill. These are the roles that we have, these are the tasks that need to be completed, these are the responsibilities we have, right? But then who fills those roles and who sits in those boxes, that may be a lot of the same name when you're first starting out. And that's just part of a small business, and that's just part of everybody pitching in and figuring it out, right? But if I've got somebody who is filling my marketing seat, and they're also my office manager, and they're also my accountant, right? Because that's what I have to do at the time. And they're just not any good at making sure those invoices get out on time, right? They may have to fill that seat today, but the first time I get to add another position on the administrative side, I'm filling the accounting seat with the right person that's going in there, because really the marketing seat is already filled and taken care of with my marketing person, and that's really where they drop. So don't build your accountability chart based on who is currently doing the job, right? So don't say, well, because I've got somebody that's doing accounting, office management, and marketing, that's one seat and that all goes together, because that doesn't make sense, right? If I'm doing it in an ideal world and money was no object, and I could have all the positions filled I wanted, I'm not going to hire the same person to do marketing, office management, and accounting, right? Build it out to the structure that makes sense. If you can fill all the positions that need to be filled, and then put the names in your boxes of who is actually filling those seats today, okay? You can have the same person in multiple boxes. You cannot, however, have the same responsibility in multiple boxes, right? So I can't have a box that says my VP of Sales and Marketing is responsible for setting our marketing strategy, and then have my Director of Marketing also responsible for setting marketing strategy, right? Because then who's responsible for it? If more than one person's responsible for it, nobody's responsible for it, right? Now, I can have my VP be responsible for setting marketing strategy, and my director responsible for implementing marketing strategy, right? Those are 2 separate things. This is high level, setting the vision, marketing strategy here, and this is carrying out those tasks that need to be handled so that we can put the strategy in place, right? So you can have the same person in multiple boxes, but you cannot have the same responsibility to show up in multiple boxes. A couple of caveats to that. One is if you've got a sales manager, you're going to have a box for a sales manager, but you've got 5. They're all responsible for the same thing, but with the exception of this one's responsible for commercial, this one's responsible for residential, this one's responsible for Fortune 500 accounts. Okay, so technically the box looks very similar, but it is different because there's a different focus area for that, right? In our business, our controllers are who are responsible for the account management with our clients. They own that relationship, they're working on the client, they're managing all that. I have 15 controllers, right? So they all have the same job description, same responsibilities, all of that. But what makes their box different is that they're responsible for their set of clients. Okay? So same person can be in multiple boxes, but the same responsibility cannot show up in multiple boxes. Okay? I'm going to show you an example of an accountability chart. We'll walk through this first page in more detail, and then we will kind of build out. I'll go through the others a little bit more briefly. So when you look at the accountability chart, and just so you all know, at the end of this, there's going to be a website that you can, a link that you can get. I'm going to load various templates and things to that site, and one of them is going to be a template to create an accountability chart. So you are welcome to download that once the session's over. So everything should be live by the end of the week. There's a few things out there now, but there will be some more out there. So if you look at the accountability chart, if you guys are familiar with EOS, that's what some of these terms come from. EOS is just an operating management system for business, kind of a way to run your business. Our company runs on EOS, so that's where some of these come from. But accountability charts we were using an accountability chart before we knew anything about EOS, and it just so happens that that's part of that philosophy there too. So you'll see the visionary. Really, the visionary is essentially the CEO, the leader of the company. It might be the owner in your case, like whatever your title. If you're the owner of the company, or whoever is the owner of your company, that's the person that's in that visionary seat, right? They're usually they're that person in that visionary seat. Now, as the company grows and as you fill the right seats with the right people, you may find that I really don't like being the visionary. I like to be the project manager, and I want to just go out there and run the teams. So the owner of the company may not be the person in that top box. Again, you're building your box, you're building your accountability chart, you're building your boxes based on what does this company need to run efficiently, not who do I have currently what's in there. Okay? So you'll see here that I use this example as it's my company, and so I'm the visionary, and I run the company, and I'm the visionary, right? But I also am the integrator because there's no one else to do that at this time, so I have to fill both of those seats, right? The integrator is, again, that's an EOS term, but I would say it's a president. It's the person that's going to make sure things get done. The visionary is the person that's coming up with all the ideas that, squirrel and going this way and that way, and then the integrator makes sure everybody kind of comes together. So if you look at these, I've got responsibilities. The visionary's responsibility is generating ideas, like coming up with what are we going to do? How are we going to break into this new market, or what's a new service that we should start providing? It's also relationships, making sure you are in the right places, making sure you're showing up where you need to be showing up. Culture, it's really, the tone is set, right? Who do you want to be as a company? The visionary really sets that top level culture. Market needs, what does the market need, right? I mean, most of your businesses were started, if you started from scratch, because you saw a need for the service that you're providing, right? Our business was the same way. Somebody asked me for help, I helped them, realized this could be a business, the business was started, right? So looking at the market needs, and then just setting direction with the company, like saying, this is how we're gonna go, right? The integrator or the president, or this might be a VP position, the titles that you choose are less important than the responsibilities that are in their box, right? So the integrator, LMA is lead, manage, and hold accountable. So my goal in being the visionary, which is my goal is to only be a visionary and nothing else, is I don't have to lead anybody, but I don't have to manage anybody. Let's say that. I don't have to manage anybody to hold them accountable, right? But the president does. So the president has to hold them accountable and make sure everybody's doing what they're supposed to be doing, right? And we're saying they're problem solving, remove obstacles, business model and planning, figuring out how are we going to do this, right? Visionary's coming up with the idea, but the president says, okay, great idea, now how are we going to implement this? So there are different responsibilities for each of these positions, right? VP of Business Development, they're in charge of revenue. They're in charge of making sure that we're bringing revenue in the door, right? VP of Operations, they're in charge of servicing the customers and providing the services that we have told these customers that we'll provide. And they're responsible for protecting your margin, right? They got to make sure, okay, are we getting, are we limiting our overtime to make sure that we are hitting our margins? Where are we at on our vendor pricing, and does it make sense for that? They're protecting the margins. And then you have your VP of Administration is leading the team that really handles all the other stuff, IT, HR, accounting, all of that. These are, in this case, this example, they're 3 separate people, okay? So, but at one point in time in a business, they might have all said Shauna in there, right? Because I didn't have anybody to hand these tasks off to. But I needed to know that right now I'm wearing my marketing hat, my sales and marketing hat. Tomorrow I'm wearing my administration. I need to know and separate those things so that I'm not, so that I'm able to fulfill the responsibilities of each of those roles, okay? So you go from there, this is our leadership team, right? So this is the leadership team, so I've got, these 3 leaders of each department. Well, then they're leading a department, right? So they're leading their division, their function, their department, whatever you want to call it. And so again, now Mark, who is the VP of Business Development, he also is the Director of Sales right now. He's filling that seat because this company doesn't yet have the resources to hire a Director of Sales, right? So he's filling that seat. My Director of Marketing is also filling my Marketing and Sales Specialist seat because, again, we don't have the resources to fill both seats. But I want to know that just because we don't have that person, I need to know somebody's still got to be accountable. Those tasks still have to happen, right? Those things still have to get done. And so I want to know that, yes, as we get bigger and as we can, I need to hire a specialist to help the Director of Marketing, but right now she's got to handle both of those things, okay? When you develop your accountability chart, what you want to do is think about, think in the future, think about, okay, if I'm a $10 million company, what do I need? But it doesn't mean it's set in stone, right? We revisit our accountability chart every year. We add positions. We add positions throughout the year if we realize, based on what we're doing, based on market needs, based on customer feedback, whatever it happens to be, we say, oh, we need somebody that can do X. And then we look at our accountability chart and we rearrange and restructure and add those positions as needed. So try to set it up to say this is where we will be someday, but just know that you will continue to add more positions and things will change over time as your business grows too. All right, so I've got production operations, we've got, a leader of that team, our VP, and then we've got a project manager. The project manager also happens to be my production scheduling manager, and then I've got a foreman, and then there's various, again, crew. When I say you can't have the same position or same box, essentially, have the same responsibilities, but on your crew, they're all doing this, right? You need multiple crew members, but if they're all doing the same thing, it's just you're saying you're doing this on this job, you're doing this on this job, and it's the same responsibility. So you would build this out more based on the specific positions or what you want to fill on your crew that you are having service. So, and then administration. You'll notice there's all the same name in here except for the office manager's Mandy, which Mandy you saw in the marketing on the business and development. Again, she's filling this role right now because we need it, and so she's going to be in there. But she's also servicing on the administration team. One thing I will say about that is that if you have someone that is filling multiple roles and it's not a direct line from a supervision standpoint, make sure that that person reports to one person and one person only, even though they're doing responsibility, they may be getting assignments from someone else. That way for your team member, it's very clear. I report to this person, this is my boss, and then my boss will collaborate with my other pseudo-boss to make sure that everything's getting handled that needs to get handled. But it can get too confusing if you've got people sitting in so many different seats and they report to this person on this task and this person on this task and this person on this task. So have them report to one person from a management standpoint, but then just know that they are also still a part of that other team. So, does anybody have any questions on the accountability chart? when you, especially if you've been in business for a while, you are just out there doing your thing, and you think you have processes, or maybe you do it this way one time, and you do it this way one time, and you don't know really what the process is, to sit down and try to think through it and develop it and document. It is a daunting task. However, it is critical to scalability of your business. If you are, if you're sitting there and the sales process looks one way for this customer, but it looks a different way for this customer, right? Then you're not providing the same level or quality of service to your customers. And it doesn't mean that this way is right or this way is right? It doesn't mean, it's not about which way is right, it's about if I go to Fortiviti to get my accounting taken care of, I want to know that it's being taken care of in the same way as someone else who goes to Fortiviti to get it taken care of, right? And so if you go through the process and the sales manager says, okay, yep, we've closed the deal, we've scheduled your job, and your job is going to be fulfilled on April 15th, and that's it, that's the end of it, right? But the next person says, well, your job's going to be filled on April 15th, but due to weather, sometimes it gets pushed to the 17th. It might get pushed to the 17th. We'll let you know. We'll communicate. We'll do. It's a totally different process on each side, right? And so again, which way is wrong? I mean, people know if I'm getting my driveway paved on April 15th and it's raining that day, I know you're probably not showing up. But the other person actually, it was part of the process that they said, okay, this is how we work, this is how we reschedule, this is how we do this. So just thinking through, making sure your processes are consistent so that both customers have the same experience, right? So that you are, no matter who you're servicing, they're getting the same experience, whether it's on the sales side, whether it's your vendors, your customers, your team members, right? Having processes in place to make sure things are being done consistently. So I would, as we look through, we talked about your functional areas. The areas that I would focus on when you're looking at processes and documentation would follow, your functional areas, or the areas that you develop from your accountability chart. So make sure that you have processes around your IT structure, your organization. How should things be filed? Where should they be filed? Where can I find things? Those should be developed and documented. Your marketing process. What's our goal for, blogging each month or week or twice a month? What are we doing with that? How are we doing it? How are we getting content? How are we going to manage our social profiles? What are we doing from that? Are we going to post 3 times a week? Are we going to do stories? Are we going to do, setting those processes to say, okay, on Mondays we post this, on Tuesdays we do this, on Thursdays we do this. Setting those processes so that it's not, we blogged, and I will tell you, we're guilty of this. We blog, we're very consistent, then we get busy, and 6 months later we have to put a blog on the website in 6 months, right? But if we have a process in place for that, then we can say, okay, we need to make sure that every Friday we're talking to one of our team members and trying to get content to create that blog, right? Or once a month we're doing that. So when you're looking at your processes, every area that you have, sales process, contract management, production and scheduling, make sure you set up your processes in each of the areas that you're going to be, having to repeat the tasks, essentially. So I will tell you that in our business, we have every process under the sun for our operations. We have processes, checklists, documentation, everything. We're very process driven. And over the last few years, we're trying to get there with our other divisions or other functions, right? So sales and marketing has kind of been more fly by the seat of our pants, and now we're trying to document those processes. So you may not go sit down at home and when you get home and say, okay, we're going to document every one of our processes that we have, and we're going to get that done this week. It's going to take some time. Think about the processes that are the most important to have developed and simple and streamlined and documented, because they're the processes that you repeat most often, that you have the most people having to handle those, different people handling those processes, so that you are providing a consistent experience to your customers. And also so that you have that scalability and longevity, right? It's much easier to train if you have processes in place. It is much easier to deal with someone who just doesn't show up to work tomorrow, and you've got to handle their job if there's a process in place for them. So, some of the documentation or tools that I recommend using, the first I would say is a flow chart. Flow charts are very visual and simple. It's, if I'm looking, I'll go back to the rescheduling example. Our process to say, okay, we're going to reschedule work this is how we're going to reschedule work. If we have a weather issue, right? Today's a great example. Half of you flew in from snow, and the rest of us are getting poured on here. You know, we're all dealing with weather today, right? So if you had scheduled work for today, we have a weather issue. That's the trigger on this flow chart. The weather's bad, whatever it happens to be, right? And if my process is, okay, the scheduling manager says, oh, we've got weather today, we need to go look at everything that was scheduled for today. I'm going to go to the sales manager for each of the jobs that was supposed to be completed today. I'm going to tell the sales manager, hey, you need to communicate with your customer. We're going to have to reschedule their job, and I can fit them in on Thursday if they can confirm. Next step in the process is sales manager calls the customer, comes back and says, yep, confirmed for Thursday. Now Thursday they go in the schedule. I'm the production manager, and I go put that in the schedule. By the end of the day, I've now moved everyone from this day to Thursday, Friday, Monday, whatever day they were able to confirm, right? The process would have a flow chart that says, here's what I do, here's what you do, here's what you do, here are all the steps for completing those things, right? The flow chart makes it really easy to see. It makes it easy to just look at and say, okay, I know if we have a weather issue, the first person in the line of defense for this weather issue is the scheduling manager, right? So that's what a flow chart would be. A write-up gives you more detail. So the flow chart may only have 5 boxes, and it may say, you know, production, scheduling manager does this, sales manager contacts customer, scheduling manager moves them, and a new schedule gets sent out, right? There may just be those 4 high-level things, 5 high-level things. The write-up's going to have more detail. The write-up's going to tell you how do you log into the system to update the schedule. How do you document or redistribute that schedule? How many days out are you supposed to try to go when you schedule? Like, it's going to give you more details on what you're doing in the write-up. The flow chart is going to be more just your high level, right? So if you're just getting started with this, if you've never really developed processes for your business, start with the flow chart. It's easy, it's a good visual, it's simple, it's a great place to start. And then you can start to get more detailed as you have more time to dig into your processes and to really have the team members that are a part of it help you develop those processes. Okay? And then finally, checklists. So checklists, I would say, checklists run our business, right? We need to make sure that we have a checklist that says, I completed all the things I'm supposed to complete for this client this week, this day, this month, all of those things, right? When you go to close your books for the end of the month, and you know that I've got to reconcile my bank account, and then I've got to, post my journal entry that posts my depreciation expense, and then those are accounting things that have to be done, but there's steps that have to happen. And if I don't have a checklist for me to check those off and make sure I have them, I remember, I've done this for years, right? So I should remember all those things, but if I don't have a checklist, I might just forget one step, and then now my financials aren't correct because I missed that one step that needed to happen. So making sure that you have checklists that talk through here's what we do when we bring on a new client, here's what we do when we get a signed agreement, here's how we invoice our customers, here's the things that need to be checked off every day, every week, every month to make sure that we're handling all of our tasks. Okay? So flowcharts, I would say, are the easiest and simplest method. Your write-ups are going to be more detailed, but your checklists are going to be more the tool that you're actively using as you go through each process that you go through. All right, so now we're going to move on to IT structure and file organization. Okay, so this is where I said if you're not paperless, please go back and set a plan in place to go paperless. I really do feel that it's we're starting to see it. Those companies, those clients that we work with that are still really holding on to all that paper. If you pay a bill and you staple the bill stub or the check stub to the bill still, let's move beyond that, right? And we're seeing it. We're seeing that it really is starting to cause companies to fall behind, and it's causing you to have more staff than you need for the size that you are. And so I will just highly recommend that you work going paperless this year. So here's some areas to think about as you're either cleaning up your paperless environment or your IT structure, or if you were looking to convert to go that way. The system that you use, there are various, right? Some people like Microsoft, SharePoint, Teams, all that. Some people use Dropbox, other people use Google Drive. I'm partial to Microsoft and SharePoint, but that's because that's what we've used forever, and so we know how to use it. Other people are really partial to Google Drive, and I hate Google Drive because that's not what I'm used to, right? So whatever you use, whatever is what you're most used to and what you can get around it the easiest, use that. Make sure that you're setting yourself up for success by using something that is easy to use and that you like the functionality of. But once you're in there, once you've figured out, we've developed our structure, right? So we know that we've got a sales and marketing team, we know that we've got an administration team, we know that we've got our operations team. I want to create my structure within my IT structure and my filing cabinet in the same way, right? I want to know that there is a place for everyone on my administration team. That's where they work. That's where all their documentation is. All my operations team, that's where they work. That's where all their documentation is. And then my sales and marketing team, right? So create your structure so that you have those functional areas. So if I am in, Microsoft SharePoint, I might create a separate SharePoint site for each of those departments of those divisions, okay? And then that SharePoint site is going to have all the various structure within how I want to keep things separate. I recommend I get on my team a lot for not just throwing things out into, I think we need to save that, I'll just create a folder and I'll just do that, right? I highly recommend you don't just let people create whatever folder they want, name things whatever they want, do whatever they want, because you will hate being paperless because it'll be a mess, right? So set some parameters and say, hey, if it can't fit in one of these folders and you really strongly believe there needs to be another folder, let's talk about it and then let's create it and let's all discuss what goes in that folder and why, okay? So set that structure for you. I've got, I think in the handout there's some some example of some folder structure, but set what makes sense to you. Set, okay, I've got my sales and marketing, and then I might separate and have sales and marketing is separate under there, and then within there I've got prospects and leads, and I've got, under the marketing I've got logo files and creative documents, however, again, whatever you have in your business, I may have 22 marketing folders because I'm very, specific, and we do a lot of marketing, and we go to trade shows, and then we do this and we do that. You may have one because you literally may say, well, we have a Facebook account, and that's all we do. Okay, that's fine. So then you've got a folder for Facebook, and that's got all your content. Okay, so set your structure up so that all of your items will be organized in a way that anyone can find it if they go sit down and try to find what they're looking for. Okay? The other thing I recommend is if you are still manual and you have a lot of paper, when we first converted to paperless, like 12 years ago, right, we were also a holdout. Like it was hard, right? Change is hard. And so the way we made it easier is we said, okay, well, how do we currently file everything when we have our paper, right? So we had an AP folder that was divided and had different sections. One section was for new bills received, and then there was a little tab, and then the next section was entered, so we'd entered it into the system, and then the next section was paid, right? And so then those would go in there, and then the back was hold, like we have questions, we don't know, we need to follow up on this, right? So that's where everything was housed for each client, and so we might have 10 bills that need to be entered this week, and we knew exactly where to find them, we'd enter them, and then they'd be in the enter folder, right? So what we did when we went paperless is we said, okay, we're going to create those exact same folders electronically, so when we get a bill, it goes in here. When we enter it, it goes in here to the entered folder. When we have paid it, it goes into the paid folder. And if we have any questions on it, it gets named and hold, right? So it's not having to retrain you completely from what you already know, right? But helping you to say, how can I make that transition the least painful as possible, and how can I get there? And know that I'm going to set myself up for success for that. So the other types of folders I would say within your functional areas that I would recommend is having folders where all your procedures live, right? Having a folder like here's where all of our procedures are, so that I'm not trying to find, well, would we have that procedure under sales, or would it be under leads or marketing? Like, where is that? Just here's all of our procedures for sales and marketing, right? If you've got, your permanent stuff, like legal documents, you've got your articles of organization, anything that's permanent that is not year dependent, right? It's not going to be moving year to year. You're not going to be filing it away in 2022 and then never looking at it again. Have a folder for that permanent type documentation. Have a customer folder for all the, your customer folder should have all the things that don't ever, that aren't year dependent. So your agreement with them, maybe their W-9, maybe, whatever those things are that you've got on hand for them, but then their actual like project files or invoices or things like that would be saved in maybe that year's folder. Okay, so think about like the things that are stagnant, that stay, that are always going to be there versus those items that once this year's over, I'm probably not going to be looking for that again. But I can find it if I want to. So, and then have processing or queue folders. So in order to truly go paperless, right, I have a lot of people who, they get all of their documentation via email and they print it out so that they can put it in a file so they know they haven't done that yet, right? So instead of printing it out and putting it in a file so that you know you haven't done it yet, put it in a processing folder that says, hey, I received this bill in from, my vendor, and now I'm moving that over into a folder that says this hasn't been handled yet, right? Or I need to, I've entered this bill, but it's just sitting there because I haven't yet paid it. I haven't yet paid my vendor, so I'm just going to leave it out there. But I know that means this one hasn't been paid yet, right? So have those processing or queue folders that help you. Time cards. Where do I put time cards until I've actually processed them and paid that payroll? Put them in a payroll processing folder. So have those kind of processing or queue folders there. And then have your filing folders. And this I would recommend doing, again, however works for you, right? Some people like to say they have a vendor folder where they keep copies of every bill that they've ever paid to one vendor, doesn't matter what year it is, right? Other people want to have annual or monthly folders that say this is all the activity that happened in that month. Whatever works for you, wherever you feel like you're going to be able to find it, is fine. Just make sure it's consistent and everybody does it the same way, okay? The other thing is if you're working in an accounting system, yeah.
Do you guys all have your own personal scanners on desks? Or are you like,
various things, using scanners on phones is typically what we're doing if we have to actually scan it. But we also have a process where any physical things that come in the office, one person is scanning it out to the appropriate places that it needs to go.
Gotcha.
Yep. So like
you're pre-scanning all your documents.
Right. If we get things in the mail, our goal is we try to get everything as much as possible. We set it up for electronic delivery, right? Bills, things like that. Some people are still old school, right? So if you're getting a physical bill still, then we take that bill, we scan it, and we shred it. So we don't keep that physical bill, we scan it, and then we just get rid of it. Yep. So, and if you have an accounting system, or, that you, like QuickBooks, and we're going to talk about accounting systems in a second, but if you have an accounting system, attach things in there too. Like then you've got it, then it's there, and it's attached to all the transactions that you have. So you don't have to go into QuickBooks, look for it, and then go to your files to find it. It's all right there. Okay. We currently keep both for that kind of stuff. We keep it, we attach it in QuickBooks, but we still keep our copy electronically, just because there's currently in really any of the systems that we work in, because we work in other accounting systems, there's not an easy way to just pull all the detail out for that. Like if somebody says, I want to see all your bills that you paid to vendor XYZ, there's no easy way to do that, to download from QuickBooks, where there is an easy way if we do it in our electronic files. So, any questions on that? Okay, so when you have then, now you've got the structure all put together, right? So you have the structure, you've got the folders, okay, if I know, like when in our business, we know that if I sit down and I open a client's folder, it's going to look the exact same as this client's folder. It's going to have the same AP folder, the same AR folder, the same inventory folder, the same customer. It's going to look exactly the same. So anyone in our business can sit down and say, I'm going to open up this customer file, and they're going to know exactly what's in each folder, where to find it, and all of that, right? So if you've got customer, like project files, you've got a project folder for each one, you want to make sure that that structure is in there, right? That everything is going to be the same. So then you've got to deal with the naming of those items. And this is where the system can break down, right? You might have all the folders, you might have all these things, but if somebody just scans something from the scanner and it names it scan, and then they just throw it out there and it's called scan, you have no idea what that is, right? You can't search on it, you have to open it up to see what it is, and then if you don't rename it, then the next time you're in there, you open it up to see what it is. So the most important part of going to a digital filing system and looking at your structure is that you are all consistently naming everything. So come up with, again, whatever structure you think works for you, right? If you want to have the date be first, have the date be first. And then everything is going to line up and it's going to be in your date order. If you want to have the vendor name or customer name or bank name or whatever be first, first, have that be first. Whatever works for you, but come up with a standard structure that you are going to name everything that comes, every electronic file that you have in your business, you're going to have a standard structure, okay? So if you look here, here's some examples. So we have come up with kind of a standard structure of all caps together is our code for the type of document, right? So it's a bill, it's a payment, it's an agreement, it's a contract, whatever. Okay, so we've got, and our naming conventions file is pages and pages long, but there's the 20 standard that we use all the time, right? So we've got a signed agreement that is going to be used for anything, anytime we have a signed agreement, whether it's a vendor agreement, a customer agreement, a bank agreement, it's going to say signed agreement, and then it's going to say the date of that agreement, when did we sign it, and then it's going to say who the agreement is with. If then we want additional information, then we're going to have parentheses behind it, and we're going to put additional information, right? So I might say signed agreement, date, landmark bank, and in parentheses I say PPP loan, right? So that tells me that this is the signed agreement for our PPP loan, okay? If it's a customer or a vendor file, it might be you'll see that PMTCC document right there. PMTCC, that means it's a payment that we made with the credit card, okay? And that's the date of the payment and the vendor, but then we put behind it which credit card is used. Because sometimes we have 26 credit cards that are getting used in a business and we're trying to make sure, okay, whose was that? Which number was that? Or which account was that, right? So again, these are just examples. You use what makes sense for you, but it helps, what it does is it allows when I open up my end of month folder for anything, right? It's going to have all the deposits together because they're all DEP files. It's going to have all the payments together because they're all PMT files. If I open my customer folder, it's going to have all the signed agreements together because they're all named the same, right? So you're going to be able to find things, one, visually if you're looking in a folder, but two, if you're searching for something. If I know that I'm trying to look for check number 1234, I search PMTCK1234, and that's going to pop up. Okay? And if it doesn't pop up, then we don't have that support. But if I don't know if you named it PMT space CK space 1234 and I named it PMTC, right, then I'm not going to be able to find it. I'm going to have to search a million different times. So this takes probably the most training for your team, anybody who's involved with that process, to make sure that they're naming it appropriately, because everybody kind of gets their own. We laugh about space dash space in our business because we say you do this, then space dash space, and then you do this, and space dash space. Because if you don't do the dash in between, or you don't do the space in between the dash, it does change the whole dynamic of the name, right? So think about that when you're thinking of what your naming conventions are going to be. Okay? Let's move on from IT and structure with just the last, I highly recommend figuring out how you get yourself streamlined there and go paperless this year. So now we're going to talk about CRM, project management, task tracking. So this is a broad topic, and you could do a whole session on this. So I'm not going to go into much detail on the systems that you should try to look at or use or anything of that nature. Just talk a little bit more of what you want to think about when you're thinking about this task management. So there's a lot of things that have to happen in your business, right? There's a lot of tasks. There's a lot of items that need to be completed. There's a lot of deadlines that you have in business. And you need to have some methodology and some system for tracking those things. So whether you have an Excel spreadsheet that says, here's all the days of the whole year, and these are all the things that need to be done, and I'm going to go highlight them when I'm done, that's a system, right? That's a process that you can put in place. But you need to have something, annual reports is a good example I always use. You need to file an annual report in most states, not all states. You need to file an annual report every year for your business to keep it active, right? If you're a business, we're in Kansas City, which means most of our companies have annual reports in Kansas and Missouri because we split the state. Missouri has different rules than Kansas. Okay? If you have a business that's in multiple locations, some annual reports are due, like when your taxes are due, others are due based on when you registered, others don't even have the requirement, right? So how do you know all that and keep track of? Okay, I've got 7 annual reports to file. This one's due April 15th, this one's due in September, this one's due, right? You need to have a system for tracking this, okay? So some people will use their CRM system, which is customer relationship management system, for all of this, right? right? You can use it to house all your customer data, but you can also use it to track tasks. You can use it for sales process management, and then just throw those tasks in there for that. So that can work, right? Some people can't make that work because it's not really built to be a project management system, and you have more projects that need to be done. There's a start and a finish, and there's all these things that need to happen in between. So you want to think about, okay, where am I going to keep track of my customer data, right? Is it on, Joe's desk on a sticky note, how to call the customer and contact them because he's the sales manager who works with them? Or do we have a system where he puts it in there so that if I need to contact Joe or I need to contact the customer because Joe didn't show up to work today, I can go find that information, right? So where am I going to keep this information, and what kind of information do I need to keep? Do I just need a name and a phone number? Because, the people that we're working with, we're out in the field, we're talking on the phone. Or do I need an email address? Do I need a mailing address? What information do I need to have on each customer? And then setting up a system to keep track of that. Again, I see plenty of businesses that still track this kind of stuff in Excel. And if that's what works for you, and that's where you're at in the business, then do that. Just make sure that you have that tracking. But I recommend starting to look at what are those systems that can kind of pull everything together and streamline that for you. How are you going to manage production schedules? I use the example of, okay, we've got a production schedule and it's hanging on the conference room wall, and it's all pretty and it looks great, but the second somebody calls in and says, well, we couldn't do that job today because we showed up and the material wasn't there, or whatever it was, then that person, they can't see that conference room wall anymore to figure out who can we move and what can we do, right? So figuring out, how are we going to do this, and how are we going to make it easy to use? How are we going to make it accessible to people? How are we going to make sure we can access it when we need to, we can see it in real time? So think through all those options so that nobody predicted that when 2020 happened, that all of a sudden one day nobody was going to show up to work on that next day, right? And if everything you needed was sitting at work, and you needed to go look at that, you were forced to go into work and get all that information. So think about those things on, as you set up your virtual systems and you set up your file structure and you set up how your business is going to operate, think about how do we make things accessible to the people that need them, and what kind of information do we need to have out there so that we have it available for that. So the other thing I'll just say on CRMs and task management, one for task management, if you can find one, and if you do, let me know, because we still struggle finding a task management system we like, that does recurring tasks well. I highly recommend that, because that's one of the areas, right? You go file your annual report on April 15th that was due, and once I complete that, if you don't say, oh, I want to go create another task for next year, this is going to be due again, then all of a sudden you miss it next year. So the recurring tasks, that you can complete it and it just creates it for you automatically, I highly recommend that. Plenty of the systems out there do that, they just don't do other things that we like. So, it's finding the system that works the best for you and what you need it to do, okay? There's great systems out there, but you just may find that one works better than another for you and what you're looking for, okay? All right, so now we're going to talk about accounting. Accounting is one of the most important parts of the back office side of things. And I don't say that just because I am an accountant. I say that because it's how you get the money in your business, right? It's how you keep your business going. Is money, cash is the lifeblood of the business. That's what the business is in business to do and to produce. And it's really, accounting is how you make sure to manage that. So I'm going to talk, there's a lot to cover in accounting, and so I'm just going to briefly touch on the pieces of that. I'm doing a session tomorrow morning on both job costing with Matt Slauson and also financial reporting and understanding your financials. So if there's any of these topics you want to dig deeper into, they're going to be touched on. Those are full 90-minute sessions just on those areas. So I'm going to just briefly touch about a few things with accounting, but we will talk about accounting systems first. And accounting systems, there's so many accounting systems out there. There are very, very entry-level, hardly do anything accounting systems, and then there are huge ERP systems that would take you an entire team to implement and to get working for your business. So, I would say most people are aware of and know QuickBooks because it is the most common tool out there used for the small market business. And the primary reason for that is that there's QuickBooks and then there's ERP systems, and there's not a lot in between. So that's why you hear about QuickBooks so much. But it doesn't mean it's the only solution for you. There are industry-specific systems that you may choose to look at. There are ERP systems that may make sense for your business if you get to a specific size. And then there's, QuickBooks, and there's Xero, which is a competitor of QuickBooks and similar. There is FreshBooks, which I wouldn't recommend for the paving industry, but it's something very simple to use. So there's lots of options out there. So if you find that there's one that's not working for you, or you don't think it's working for you, look for the options that work the best and are going to do what you need them to do. My key factors I will tell you when you're considering this is first, don't go bigger than what you need. We have a lot of people that end up converting from QuickBooks because they think they've outgrown it, and they go to this ERP system, and then it's so much stuff. There's so many pieces to it. There's so many things to do in there. They don't use half the functionality. They're paying 3 times the cost, and it doesn't work for them because they're not using it the way it's supposed to. So make sure before you say you've outgrown whatever system you're in, that you really understand what your system can do. I get people all the time telling me, well, we've outgrown QuickBooks because we have inventory issues. Well, QuickBooks Online, not the best at inventory, but there's add-ons that you can use that work great for it. You've got people that say, I can't use QuickBooks Online because I do job costing, right? You can use QuickBooks Online for job costing. You used to not be able to, but you can now. So, making sure you actually understand what it can and can't do before you say, well, we've outgrown it, okay? So just don't go bigger than you need because you're going to regret it. You're not going to be happy with that decision. Be careful with industry-specific software that is solely focused on the front end, but then you try to use it for the back end, okay? So industry-specific software is developed by people that are in the industry and they're trying to solve the pain points, right? Which is great. That's why it exists. And that's why that software is great. That's why you go in there and you think, man, they built this for me, and they really did. Because they are in your industry, they know your industry, and they know the pain points, they know what needs to be tracked. Often, though, the accounting side of that, or the GL function that they build into that system, is kind of an afterthought. It's not why they built the system. They built the system to solve the front end problem, and then they just threw the back end problem, or the back end solution in with that. So just make sure that if you're going to go with an industry-specific software, understand its limitations, understand what it's going to be able to do for you, and then you might need to integrate it back with another accounting system that you have. So use the industry-specific systems. Those are great for the front end. They're great for project management. They're great for knowing the industry and knowing how to handle things. But just make sure you know what it can and can't do, and that you're aware of that. Okay. All right, so then let's talk about getting money in the door. So accounts receivable, this is really important for both cash flow and also just your business operations, right? Profitability. Making sure that you are getting money in the door consistently and that you are invoicing appropriately for what makes sense for your operations. So first thing to think about is how are you going to invoice? Are you planning to, do you do a deposit invoice and then charge the rest upon completion? Do you charge a deposit and then charge, do phases or milestones throughout a project if it's a larger project? Think through not only how you do it today, but what would be best for your business and how should you do it for your business going forward, okay? I highly recommend doing deposit invoicing for any of the projects that you're doing. Almost every project that you do is going to have some sort of material cost you're going to be able to purchase before you ever go on site, right? So if you are billing a deposit and you say, we're not starting a job until we get paid that deposit, you know you're going to be covered for that materials cost that you're going to have, right? So then you're just waiting on the profit margin, or you're waiting on really the second half of it is covering your labor and your profit, but you know at least you cover your materials that you have to order. Okay? If you can get away with it and it works with your customer base, say, hey, if we do this project, we just charge up front, right? I just ordered a pool cover for our pool, and they said, okay, well, we require the full payment up front. I'm not getting it for 3 months, right? But I had to pay for it. So they can do that because there wasn't anybody else for me to order one from. You might not be able to do that because there might be other people that are saying, well, we'll bill you upon completion or whatever, but think about that from a business standpoint. If you don't have to worry ever about collecting the money because you charge up front, what is that worth to you? And, are you okay with maybe being a little bit smaller and not having as many customers because you're never worried about AR? So think through what makes sense for your business and what your business can sustain. And then, how do you manage your contracts, making sure that your contracts are clear on when you're going to invoice, if there's going to be, right into your contract, are you going to charge any finance charges if they're late, right? If they don't pay on time, are you going to charge that, charge them a finance charge? So making sure that you have a process in place for how we do contracts and what we're going to include in our contracts. What's the process for the sales team to notify billing, right? If, let's say your process is to charge a 50% deposit, salesman gets the signed contract, what happens next, right? Does the salesman then send that signed contract to the accounting team to send out that first bill? And does the accounting team hold on to that until they receive payment before they send it to production or scheduling? Or do you send it to both at the same time because we want to get them on the schedule, but we're not going to actually do the job until we receive the payment? Think about what is that process for you. What is the notification to make sure billing goes out, and then documenting that process and making sure that everybody knows what that looks like, and the timeliness of that. So if the sales team notifies me that a project was signed, I have to get the deposit invoice out within 24 hours, or whatever you're going to develop that is the best process for you. The other thing is, as you're doing phases or you complete work. So a lot of times that deposit invoice is no problem because you don't start the work till you receive it, so we know it went out. Then the job gets done, but nobody tells, accounting to send the invoice, and so that invoice could have gone out 2 weeks prior, but it doesn't. Nobody knows until they realize, wait, I didn't get paid commission on that job. What happened? Well, we never invoiced the final invoice. So make sure that you've got a process in place for who's notifying accounting that a job gets done and that something needs to be invoiced, and then a schedule for when that invoicing is going to happen. And then finally, accounts receivable management. So sending out timely invoices is key to making sure you have cash coming in the door, but make sure that you have a process in place for how you're going to manage your AR. So if I invoice when a job is complete and I give net 30 terms, right? I'm going to put a process in place that says, okay, 7 days before that net 30 date, I'm going to have an email go out to remind them that it's due, right? That way it's not really, I'm not being too aggressive yet. I'm just saying, hey, just a reminder, because people get invoices all the time. They see net 30, they put it on a desk, and they just don't think about it until somebody calls them to remind them. So send a reminder 7 days before it's due and say, hey, just a reminder, your invoice is coming up due in 7 days. Okay? If I get 3 days past that due date and I still haven't seen payment, am I going to send another email? Am I going to call? What's my process for that? And have a really consistent process for that follow-up so that every week when you look at AR, you can look and say, well, I called John last week about that payment. He said he was going to mail it. I haven't seen it yet. I should probably call him again. Right? Or what is my process? But it's consistent, and it didn't, I don't know when the last time was I followed up with them. Gosh, we haven't followed up on AR in 2 months, and we have no money coming in the door. We've got a lot of aged AR. If you have a process in place and you're consistent about it, you'll keep your money flowing and you'll keep money coming in the door. So. All right, vendor management. So, aside from bringing money in the door, we also have to take care of our vendors and make sure we manage those relationships as well. So we've got, the first thing is to make sure you understand your vendor agreements. Do you have agreements with them that are going to charge you a finance charge if you don't pay on time? Do you have an exclusivity agreement with them that says you can only buy this certain product from them? What's their price increase, timeline? Do they have increase prices whenever they want, or is it only going to be an annual price increase? Making sure you understand your agreements with your vendors and how that affects your business and your decisions that you're making. And then take advantage of vendor terms. So, one of the ways you can immediately impact your gross margin is by taking advantage of your vendor terms. So if a vendor will give you a 2% discount for paying in 10 days and your cash flow allows it, put that into your process to make sure you take advantage of those, because you can immediately see that 2% that's going to go straight against your margin, because you're going to build out your margin using the actual cost of that product, but if you get that 2% discount, that just automatically is a positive to your margins. Think about whether you want to do pay when paid. So, if you can work with your vendors, and I highly recommend you work with your vendors on this and talk to them about it. Don't just choose to do this yourself, but, tell your vendors, hey, we're going to pay you. Are you okay with us paying you when we get paid from our customer? Because we've got, large commercial contracts, they sometimes don't pay for 45 days, 60 days, but your terms are net 30, so we're having this discrepancy on our cash coming in versus needing to go out the door. So are you okay if for these types of customers, or, or this size of a job maybe, that we pay you when we get paid, right? Have that communication with them, talk to them, and see about implementing that, which will help your cash flow. And then W-9s and 1099s, so 1099s are due in 6 days, so if you have not yet filed your 1099s, this is your reminder to do so. You are required to file 1099s for all vendors that are providing you services that are not corporation, okay? So that it would be an individual, that would be an LLC, a partnership. Anybody who's not taxed as a corporation, don't ask me why that's the rule, but that's the rule. So if somebody's providing you services and it's over $600 in a year, then you need to provide them with a 1099, okay? So in order to manage this process, I recommend you're getting your W-9s, which the W-9 from a vendor, if you're not familiar with what that is, it's essentially, it's like a W-4 form that an employee fills out. It tells you as the customer who you're paying. What's my business name, what's my address, what's my tax ID, and if there is, and how I'm taxed, like the structure of my business. So I recommend that anytime you set up a new vendor, you request a W-9 and you don't issue payment until you receive the vendor. Okay? Oh, Siri's talking to me. And then you don't issue your payment until you receive it, because that way you're not on January 25th calling your vendors and trying to get W-9s and trying to get that information when you need to file it. You don't process the payment until you receive it. And honestly, they should understand that that's part of doing business, is that they have to provide a W-9, okay? So make sure that you're getting your W-9s and then you're reviewing those to determine who needs to receive one. Your material suppliers, anybody who you're buying stuff from, they do not need a 1099. It's services that you're being provided would need a 1099. All right, so again, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on job costing, tracking expenses, but I am going to say if you aren't job costing, you should be. Make sure that you are tracking your actual profitability on each job, not just profitability as a whole. Because what you'll find is you may end up learning that you are making money as a whole, but you're losing a lot of money on this type of job, and you're making a lot of money on this type of job, and if you just cut out these jobs over here, you make a lot of money with a lot less work. Okay, so a lot of people will say, hey, I'm looking at my margins and they're good, but they're only looking in total. They're not looking at each individual job. And so it really tells you a lot about what types of jobs you want to do, who you want to sell to, and really the performance of your salespeople, right? Are they selling the right kind of jobs? Are they pricing them right? Are they building in enough cost and doing all that? So make sure that you are tracking all expenses that relate to a job against that job. A couple things that make that easier to do: make sure you're collecting receipts from your team. So whoever can spend money on a job, you want to make sure you're getting a receipt from them and they're putting job information on those receipts. Again, that's kind of going back to how to do that. Like there's apps on phones that you can implement that just says, hey, snap a picture of that receipt, send it to us, and it will have all that information. Use job numbers. We often find that people want to use the job name, but then you run into Smith is a very common name, and all of a sudden you don't know which Smith job it's for. Or you've got a customer and you do multiple jobs for them a year. So using job numbers really helps with job costing and tracking. Purchase orders, this can be really helpful if you're using purchase orders and you put the job information on your purchase order. Then when you get your invoice from your vendor, you know exactly what job it goes to. You don't have to try to figure that out. I recommend every single expense that comes through your business is assigned to a job. If it is not an actual job expense, if it's office supplies or it's a restaurant or it's utilities, we create a job called overhead or admin or something to assign that cost to. And what that does is that makes sure that when I'm reviewing, I know if something's missing a job, it's because it's missing. Not because, well, it doesn't go to a job, so it's easier to review, right? So Home Depot, for example, you might have lots of Home Depot expenses for jobs, but I also might have gone there to buy supplies to repair the toilet, so it's an office supply. And so this helps me know that Home Depot expense didn't just get missed and I just didn't assign it to a job, it really got assigned to an overhead job. So I know every single expense I have got assigned to some sort of job that I'm tracking. And then review for missing costs. So if Your two things I would review each month, aside from just the profitability in general of jobs, is do you have costs that were not assigned to a job? And then do follow up to figure out what jobs they go to. And then review the jobs that did have, like all the jobs in the profitability to see if they were reasonable. Like is there a whole vendor cost missing from a job and it either got assigned to the wrong job or you haven't received it yet or something like that. Like what is missing? Don't just get really excited that all of a sudden your margin is 75% on a job when it should have been 40 and not realize, well, I'm missing that, the material bill or whatever it is. So just make sure you're reviewing for those missing costs and what's been unallocated. All right, cash flow. It is cliche, but it is also true. Cash is king. Cash flow is one of the biggest challenges we see with all of our clients. It doesn't matter what industry you're in. It doesn't matter if you've got $1 million in the bank or $2 in the bank. Cash flow is a challenge. Managing cash flow is a challenge at every size company. And so, there's a few things that you can do to help manage cash flow that can very quickly impact cash flow and can negatively impact cash flow if you're missing out or you're not doing things timely. So, number one is profitability, making sure you're charging enough for the work you're doing. None of the tips and tricks I can give you on cash flow is going to work if you're not charging enough, right? Because if you're not charging enough to cover your expenses, you're not charging enough, and you're never going to get to a positive cash flow. So that's number one. Review your job costing, review your profitability, make sure you're charging enough. Make sure your invoices are going out timely. If you are, for some of you that may mean daily, for some of you that may mean weekly. It just really depends on your volume and what you've got going on, but make sure they're going out timely. When a job is complete, there's notification, it goes to accounting gets the invoice sent out, okay? Have processes in place on how that's supposed to happen and when it's supposed to happen. As we talked about earlier, charge deposits so you can get some of that cash flow in before you're doing the work, and it'll cover some of those costs that you're going to have at the job in case that customer gets delayed in their payment and it takes a while for them to get it in. You've covered some of the costs that you're going to have. Pay when paid, we talked about that, paying your vendors when you get paid so that you can hold on to your money so that you aren't paying them before you've actually received the money from the customers. Taking advantage of vendor discounts if you can so that you can save that money, but also don't pay a vendor before you really should if you're just to try to take advantage of that discount if you don't have cash, right? If you've got $50,000 sitting in the bank and you think, oh, I really want to pay that vendor so I get that discount, but payroll's next week and you don't have any money coming in, don't take advantage of that discount and then set yourself up for that's a bigger problem over here than that 2% that you're going to make. So take advantage if you can, but also plan for when you can. Maybe just timing of payments, thinking about when you should pay things, when you shouldn't pay things. AR management, making sure you're following up on AR that hasn't been paid. And then just preparing and looking at a cash flow forecast. We do a cash flow forecast weekly, and it goes out 12 weeks. And for every one of our clients, and we look at it and we say, okay, here's the money in the bank. Here's the money we think is going to come in next week. Here's all the money that needs to go out next week. Where are we at? Okay? And oftentimes we'll see, okay, next week's fine, next week's fine, next week's fine. Oh, week 4, we can't make payroll. Okay? The reason we go out 12 weeks and the reason we're going out further, and it's not as accurate when you get out to weeks 10, 11, 12. We don't know who's going to pay or who would have already paid, but it tells me that today I can't pay all the things I want to pay today because in 4 weeks I don't have enough for payroll. Okay? So I'm going to say, okay, I've got to hold on to this vendor payment until this big check comes in that I'm thinking isn't coming in until week 5. But if it comes in next week, I can go ahead and release that payment. But I can't until I know I've got that money. I'm not making payroll in 4 weeks, so I can't pay vendor A, B, and C, or I can't pay these certain costs that I have. So I highly recommend cash flow forecasting. A lot of people will look at cash flow statements in their financial reporting, and that's great, and that's part of a package if you're going to the bank or something, but that's just telling you what already happened. The forecast is telling you what's going to happen and helping you to plan and to make decisions. All right, then your daily, weekly, and monthly checklist. So we've talked about all these things you should be doing in accounting, right? We talked about your invoicing, your accounts payable, how to manage your vendors, all the different tasks you should be doing. I highly recommend checklists that you are following daily, weekly, monthly, whatever, quarterly, whatever the frequency. I wouldn't recommend you wait to close your books till quarterly, but there may be a process that you're doing quarterly. These are these are the items we would suggest that you're doing, on a daily basis, invoicing your customers. Again, if you're smaller and you've only got 5 jobs a week, maybe doing it once a week, but, invoice your customers. Make sure that you're entering credit card transactions. That can really pile up if you've got lots and lots of credit card receipts and you're waiting to do that until the end of the week or until the end of the month. It's also helpful if you're doing it as you go, so that when you go to review at the end of the week, you can follow up more quickly on the information you need. So if somebody didn't tell you what job that charge went to, you can follow up right then instead of waiting until the end, the end of the month, and then they can't remember because it was 30 days ago. So weekly, I would recommend you reconcile your bank account, your credit card. I should probably flip review cash flow, pay vendor bills. So reconcile your bank account, then review your cash flow, and then look to see what vendor bills you're going to pay. It doesn't really make sense to pay vendor bills more than once a week. Again, it goes back to efficiency and streamlining. If you're constantly paying a bill, oh, it's the 15th, this one's due, and it's the 16th, this one's due, it's just taking a lot of extra effort you don't really need to spend. Look this week to see, well, what's due between now and the next time I'm going to pay bills and get all those bills paid, assuming your cash flow allows for it. Review and follow up on receivables, reviewing the missing job information. So putting together kind of, here's my weekly process to make sure these are all the things I get done. And then at the end of the month, close your books. I'm amazed at how many companies still don't close books on a regular basis. They do their day-to-day, but they're really not looking at their financials monthly. This is probably the most important part about accounting, right? It's, yes, you need money coming in the door, yes, you gotta manage cash flow, but if you're not using the data that you're receiving from your accounting to make your business decisions, then there's really no point to any of it. So make sure you're closing your books, make sure you're reviewing your financials, and that you're really looking at, at how you're doing and helping you make decisions on those things. Financial reporting, I'm not going to go deep into this. I've got a whole session on this tomorrow, and so a 90-minute session to fit into the next 12 minutes that I have is not going to happen, but just make sure that you are looking at your financials, you are looking at them for reasonableness, so make sure that you're really thinking, okay, there's a loan on the books for a car that I paid off 5 years ago. Okay, well that's not reasonable, something's wrong. Be looking for things that just don't seem right. If you're looking at your balance sheet and it says you have $1 million in the bank and you know you've never had $1 million in the bank, then look into that because there's likely a problem. Something probably didn't get done correctly and it's an easy fix, but you gotta fix it to make sure that everything else is right that you're looking at. So look at your trends, look at how did we do last April compared to this April. Wow, we're way ahead this year than we were last year. Oh, but remember we had all those weather events and so everything got pushed back. And so understand the difference between we're growing versus, well, it's just we didn't do all the work that we had, our backlog's just bigger, but we're not necessarily going to double in size just because we're double in April compared to last year. So look at those trends and look at kind of see how the business is performing and things that you want to dig into further and fix. If you're doing your reviews monthly, you're looking at your financials, you can fix problems before they get out of hand, right? If you look at your job profitability every month and you see that you've got a problem with one particular salesperson, you can go fix that before they sell 30 more jobs that are going to lose you money, right? So make sure you're looking at everything on a regular basis and being very consistent about that. Okay, final topic of the day is payroll and HR. And again, there's so much that goes into payroll and compliance and HR compliance, and it's so different for every single one of you because you're from all over the country. Every state is different, every state has different requirements, every system is different. So I'm just going to touch on some high-level things to think about and areas for you to go back and look and consider when you go back to your team and you kind of take this information back. One is an onboarding process that, I think what sets a lot of companies apart and what sets their employee experience apart is how new hires are. When you hire a new person, don't take them, first day, oh, we brought you donuts and throw them out in the field and just hope that they survive, right? You want to make sure that there's a process to their onboarding. Have them sit with someone to talk about the various policies that you have in the business. Go over with them. This is what a typical day looks like. Here's what your week is going to typically look like. Here's how we handle weather issues. Here's how we handle PTO. Here's how all of these things work for us. Put a training plan in place. Don't expect someone to come in day one and be ready to go, right? Make sure you're realistic, you set a training plan, because it's going to benefit you much more in the long run to spend extra time up front training someone and getting them trained and doing well than to try to throw them out there and then churn through 3 people before you get somebody that can do the job, okay? So make sure you spend the time up front, you're training them, you give them, who's your point of contact? Who do you go to for questions? Who do you go to for issues with your pay stub? Who do you go to with this? Give them the roadmap for success in their position, right? Have a process to onboarding, have a process for their training and their plan and what their first, give them an outlook. Here's what your first month's gonna look like. Day 1, day 2, day 3 might be really detailed, and then here's a high-level overview of what each week looks like, but make sure you have a process for their onboarding. Make sure you're providing the benefits that make the most sense for your team and your company at the time, right? You can't provide, not everybody can provide every single benefit that they want to. Doesn't matter if you want to or not, you can't do it, right? We used to pay 100% of benefits for our team members. I loved doing that, I thought it was great to do that. But what we found was that then benefits, for those of you who have them, they spiral every year. They raise 10, 20, 30% sometimes. We one year had a 98% increase in our benefits cost, right? Your team never sees that if you're paying 100% of it, right? My team never saw that, so then it's, hey, we can't do raises this year because our benefits went up by this. All they saw was, why didn't we get a raise, right? Even though the cost of their benefits went up. So we switched that, many years ago, we switched that and said, hey, we're gonna pay 50%. That way, we're providing the benefit for you, but you're going to see, like, hey, when your cost goes up, our cost is going up too. So you can see that this is your benefit is just increasing because the cost is going up for those benefits. So think about what your team wants, though, and where to spend your money. Like, what's beneficial for your team may be different than what's beneficial for my team. Like, my team, health benefits and long-term, short-term disability and maternity leave and all that stuff, that may be really beneficial for them, but if you've got a bunch of part-time workers or a bunch of seasonal workers, they're not thinking about any of that because they're only going to be here 6 months, 9 months, whatever of the year. So think about where you put your benefits and where you put that spend. Time tracking, this is important for 2 reasons. 1, to get people paid correctly, and 2, for your job costing. So make sure you're putting in a good time tracking system in place to where your team can track not only how often, how much they worked, but also what jobs that they worked on. And so that you can then take that data back, and then that's how you assign your job costs to, from their, what you're paying them, and then allocate that out based on the jobs that they worked on. Payroll processing, again, this is just a necessary part of doing business. You gotta make sure payroll gets processed, make sure you put your tasks, your deadlines, your due dates, and all of that in your, whatever task management system you're using, or how you're tracking that so that you don't miss payroll. So it's the biggest no-no in business is to miss paying your employees. So make sure that there's a process set up for that, and that you've got a good method for handling that. Make sure your policies are clear. I'm of the mind, I work with lots of small business owners and have for years and years. I say the less policies, the better, personally, because I think the more policies you get, the more chance you have for discrepancies, and the more chance you have for trying to, make an exception for this policy for this person because of this reason. And so I say the least policies you can have, the better, but you have to have policies. And when you set those policies, make sure that you're documenting them clearly and that you are communicating them clearly to your team. So if you have a PTO policy, lay it out to your team members what that PTO policy is, how it works, and make sure they understand it. Training, again, onboarding new hire training is super important. It's very critical to have that process in place. But make sure that you're also providing ongoing training for your team. Set a schedule, set a plan in place for how you're going to do that. Are you going to have a monthly meetup to go over, new systems, or to remind about how we do things? Is it going to be quarterly? Do you just have an annual retreat where you go over things in the off season? What does that look like for your training? Performance management. I think this is where a lot of companies miss the mark, is making sure that they're helping their team know, are you performing the way that, are you meeting expectations? Are you doing the job that we hired you to do? And so, make sure you put a process in place for performance management. I recommend quarterly, that you're formally looking at performance quarterly. Immediate feedback is very important as well. If there's true, like, hey, I need you to correct this, you're doing it wrong, you don't wait till the quarter to tell them that, and now they've done it wrong for 3 months. So immediate feedback is very important, but then formally, looking at it on a quarterly basis. We use something called a scorecard, and the scorecard really takes, that accountability chart we created an hour ago, and we looked through that and said, your responsibility is X, Y, and Z. we use then a scorecard that says X, Y, and Z, and the metrics, and are you meeting those expectations or not? It's very objective. If we hired you to grow our social media by 20%, you don't do that, then it's not that don't think you're doing a great job and you're not trying, but we haven't hit that, right? If I hired you to hit a $2 million sales goal a year and you only have one, it's very clear you're not there, right? So it doesn't mean that, oh, you didn't meet your expectation, you're fired. It just means, hey, we need to work on this, and here's how are we going to get there, what are we going to do to get there. So, and then finally, culture. I still don't know when somebody says, how would you define culture? I have no idea how to define culture. Culture is just who you are. And I think you as the business owners or leaders in the business, like you set the culture. So really think about who you want to be, who your company is, what kind of people you want, and just live it. You have to live your culture. You can't say, oh, we're this family-friendly culture and we do this, this, and this, and then your actuality is completely opposite of that, right? So you have to live your culture. But culture is becoming so much more important than it was when I started my business 15 years ago, right? People care about where they work, what they're doing, and feeling like they're doing a good job and that they're valued at work. They care about that more these days than they did 15 years ago. So it's very important. I am done and fit it all in with 3 minutes to spare. So, does anybody have any questions on any of the content that we covered?
Going back to just do the write-ups and the flow charts, do you have any good apps or software that you recommend or use to streamline some of that?
We've tried some. I forget, there's one, I'm going to blank on it now, but it's a flow chart software, Lucid Charts, I think is what it's called. It's a flow charting software. So if you're going to kind of start with the flow charts, that might be a good place to start. I like for flow charts, I like PowerPoint too. It's an easy way to put, because it actually has it built into there and you already have PowerPoint, so it's not something new you have to go get and learn. So that's a good, for the flow chart side, that's good. For checklists, we use Excel for our checklists. We ultimately would like to have a system that actually has our checklist built into it, but that doesn't exist today, or we haven't found what we like. So Excel is great for us. We actually converted to Excel from using like Word and PDF because it's easy to just manipulate and update on the fly. So for checklists that, and then for the documentation, really the write-ups, that's really going to be more your word processing. So Word or something like that. The Lucid Charts, again, we've tried it before. It may have that functionality there as well, but it's really more designed for the flow chart piece of it. Any other questions? Like I mentioned, it's in your handout should be the link to where the resources are going to be. Right now, you'll see that there's the handouts up there in the presentation, but over the next couple of days, we're going to be loading some of these templates, like the accountability chart, and just a cash flow template, some things that might be helpful to you as you move forward. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. My contact information is there as well. So thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.